Yeah, but this is it's such typical behavior for like these Western countries is that they're afraid of this. They're afraid of the country going communist. So they call us all kind of chaos.
Yes.
And then Lumumba does go to the Soviets. And then, they kill him.
Yeah.
And then there's like a communist rebellion in the country. It's kind of the story of a lot of these Cold War anti-colonial movements in which, you have, and it's like in Vietnam too, like, Ho Chi Minh, they had like the preamble to their constitution is kind of based off the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, we want to get along. And the U.S. is like, nah. Karibuni kwenye The Empire Never Ended podcast pamoja na Boris na Ray.
Hey. Hi. Was that Swahili?
Uh-oh. Boris speaking Swahili. Flexing.
Nice.
And why might that be, Ray?
I guess because it's a horrible episode about Congo, no?
Yeah, I think we're going to shift gears a little bit today to a subject that was inspired by was recent events when I decided I was going to do this episode, but was from January of this year, which I guess is still pretty recent.
Yeah.
And that's when, I don't know if you saw this, there was a group of 300 or so Romanian mercenaries.
Okay.
Who were captured by the M23 rebel group in Congo during their offensive in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo.
Okay.
And, seeing as how I have a long-standing interest in African politics in general, which never translated into this into this show because, we talk about Nazis mostly.
Yeah.
This particular event reminded me of some stuff which, very much jibes with this show. And that's the history of shadowy white mercenary groups.
I mean, there's also a direct connection because there was a bunch of Yugo mercenaries in Congo.
Well, yeah, exactly. So my initial thoughts went immediately to 1997 and the infamous White Legion, which was comprised of members of the very, very shady 10th Sabotage Detachment of the Bosnian Serb Army in the First Congo War, which is when, Mobutu was overthrown. And that is a very, very crazy story, which I guess will be in next episode.
Yes, in next episode of this series, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, because that was an interestingly multi-ethnic unit, which, went to Congo.
After doing
Srebrenica, basically, yes. So, weird stuff. But I think in general, we don't talk about the two Congo wars that went on from 96 to 2003, which, killed millions of people and somehow nobody really cares to talk about it particularly much.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in this case, we're going to be talking about it mostly because of some stupid white people that were involved.
Yeah.
But it's kind of interesting that the regime of Mobutu Sese Seko in Congo/Zaire was basically bookended by mercenaries, as in he was pretty much put into power by these ex-Nazi, white, racist mercenaries, and then lost power because the white mercenaries that he got didn't really care about fighting.
Yeah.
And were getting too busy getting drunk, torturing people.
Yeah.
And of course,
I guess there's a difference in styles of genocide between German and Balkan.
Yeah, and also, there's the whole thing that he was put into power at the behest of Western intelligence agencies and the CIA and the like. And the French did have some involvement in his downfall there, too. We'll get there next episode. But, the guys that we're going to talk about today are, these all white people from basically Rhodesia, South Africa, Germany, the UK, France, Italy, who, slaughtered their way through Congo only to be remembered as these kind of crazy adventurers who have been immortalized in the 1978 British action film The Wild Geese, which we might have to talk about after doing this episode.
Okay.
So I think many of our listeners are probably familiar with the kind of absolute brutal colonial history of the Belgians in Congo.
Yeah.
Maybe not. The Congo Free State being personal property of the Belgian King Leopold, who, of course, never set foot there and ruled a territory that was more than 9-10 times the size of Belgium.
And they still have his monuments in Belgium.
They still have his monuments in Belgium. Yeah, and people in Belgium seem to conveniently forget this at strategic moments when they're like, oh, yeah, we're not Germans, French people. Like, yeah, you had one colony and you did it horribly.
Yes.
And of course, his private rule resulted in the deaths of, by most accounts, millions of people.
Yeah.
Mutilation, starvation, execution were commonplace in order to enforce these strict production quota of goods in kind of the early period. That's ivory, later goes on to rubber production, mineral extraction.
Belgium is also famous for famously having human zoos or still in the 1950s, I think end of 1950s in Brussels.
Yeah, Brussels.
The capital of the European Union, European values. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I think you once, a long time ago, shared this in the Tenna chat of something against the Belgians and showing that they had a human zoo in 1959, which is a year before they gave Congo independence.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, pretty horrible. Yeah, and of course, all those countries are well known for, riding around on bicycles and all this fun stuff. And, they got all the rubber for that from Congo. So, built those beautiful cities. So the period after the so-called Congo Free State, when it became officially annexed as a colony. So this is 1908, no longer personal property of the king, but now a colony of the state. It wasn't much better. Like most European colonies, the interests of extractivist corporations was the primary focus. And although, certain excesses were curtailed, such as, they're not, cutting off people's hands in mass numbers for, not meeting the impossible rubber quota. Public floggings with something that's known as a chicot, which is a whip made of dried hippopotamus hide, were a routine part of day-to-day life in the Belgian Congo from 1908 up until independence. This was for, minor offenses. They would be done kind of in the town square twice a day in ceremonies when they would raise the Belgian flag.
Wow.
So yeah, no wonder people didn't want to associate with that flag particularly much.
Yeah.
And as George Nzongola-Ntalaja points out in his book, Congo from Leopold to Kabila, People's History, Colonial Rule, and I'm going to quote here, as for its impact, colonial exploitation brought about the plunder of human and natural resources and transformed Africa's societies by subjecting them to capitalist relations of production. Peasant production was progressively subordinated to export requirements of monopoly capital for agricultural raw materials. The traditional ruling class, formerly the chief beneficiary of rural surplus labor, was incorporated into the authority structure of the colonial state to facilitate its extractive and repressive tasks, including tax collection, labor recruitment, conscription, and order maintenance. Artisanal or simple commodity production lost much of its indigenous character, becoming an appendage to the capitalist commodity market and service sector, with the bulk of its activities located in the so-called informal sector of the economy.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, a nice little concise, kind of, it's a good way of showing exactly how relations in production changed in colonial rule. This form of colonial rule was based, again, on private corporate resource extraction, corporate interest, combined with a missionary approach, but both Catholic, mostly Catholic, but also Protestant missionaries were later involved in this.
Okay. I seem to remember...
It's hard to say. You can't say missionary mission. It's kind of...
I seem to remember watching the the Buckley show. What is his
William F. Buckley?
William F. Buckley's TV show from like the 60s, when he had Noam Chomsky on talking about Vietnam War while it was going on, and they had a whole debate about colonialism, and Chomsky said something about how there's usually like some kind of a pretense in colonialism, like of some doing some kind of a humanitarian or like some ideological rationalization for how the greater good of some colonial project. And he said something like there are exceptions to that. And Buckley understood that he meant there are exceptions, like that there are some actual like cases of colonialism actually being benevolent. And Chomsky meant the opposite. There's some like just purely openly kind of predatory colonialism without even a pretense of the greater good and so on. And he cited the example of Belgians in Congo as that.
Yeah, and I think he's probably was referring to the Belgian Free State, the period in which it was personal property of the king, in which, yes, there wasn't particularly a humanitarian mission.
Mm-hmm.
Now, yeah, they did try to rationalize their activity after 1908 in these kind of humanitarian ways.
Mm-hmm.
So missionaries were very much a part of that. And that is, this racist concept of the Africans being basically children who need to be taught civilization,
racism,
and values and all this other stuff. I mean, the kind of greatest example of that from kind of popular culture, although it's less popular now, is the Tintin in the Congo, which was the first Tintin comic. I mean, Tintin was generally kind of racist, but kind of
it's a Belgian
on par for the time.
Well, I think the guy who made it actually was like a Rexist. I think so too, a Belgian fascist. I think so.
But he later said he was embarrassed by Tintin in the Congo, and that's why it's not the most widely reproduced one. But that is where Tintin goes to the Congo to teach the Congolese about the glories of Belgian civilization. And
I have to admit, I grew up on like Belgian comics, not Tintin, but other ones, and they always portray Africans in like blackface.
Yeah, absolutely.
Always. Like these are comic books from like the 50s and 60s, 70s even. So
So you had this kind of combination of corporate interest, and the corporations here weren't just Belgian ones. British mineral interests were also involved because, of course, Congo is huge. It's I think now it's the largest. Sudan, I think, was larger, but now Sudan and South Sudan and Congo might still be the largest. But it borders in the colonial period, right? The French, Central Africa to the kind of north and slightly west, because there's also the French Congo on the west side of the Congo River from Kinshasa. Then on the other side, you have British colonies, right? Tanganyika, Kenya, Uganda. Then below that, you have, and also below that, right, you have Rhodesia, right, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Portuguese colonies to the west, Angola. So there's a lot of, it's basically surrounded by other colonial powers, and other colonial powers who also have an interest in, for example, the rich minerals, particularly in the east of Congo. So there were also British corporate interests operating in Congo. Yeah, missionaries, and then, of course, the interests of the Belgian state. So in the kind of decades preceding independence, you start getting a lot more rapid urbanization and development of kind of a more industrial character there, which was relatively well developed at the time of independence by kind of colonial standards. Now, of course, the legacy of being personal property of King Leopold's there throughout. I mean, it's an incredibly brutal regime, even by like most colonial standards. I think Chomsky's kind of right there, and I don't agree with Chomsky all the time.
Yeah.
And you had this when they start developing things like universities, that's almost exclusively for white people, but there is a kind of developing colonial indigenous class that's Europeanized or whatever, and you have to kind of jump through all kinds of hoops to prove your civilizational capacities or whatever, and they you'd have like inspections of your home to make sure that you live in the adequate way or whatever before you could, do education, go to school, whatever. Yeah, I mean, this is, fuck European people. I mean, I might be going out on a limb. I think if you listen to this show, you probably don't have a super high opinion of colonialism, or at least I hope not.
Yeah.
But I think there's this kind of traditional narrative that, the Europeans decided after World War II that the global order was changing and it was time to let go of their colonies and, build this world in which we'd, all live together and cooperate. I mean, this is, everybody knows this bullshit. But what that does primarily is erase the entire history of anti-colonial resistance that existed from the very beginning up until the very end. And those are things that didn't just happen, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, throughout this period, you had huge, large and small rebellions ranging from like peasant rebellions in the countryside to strikes, all this kind of thing. Also including some interesting figures. Again, I like some, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but this guy, Simon Kimbangu, who was a Congolese religious figure who emerged in the 20th century, who had some sort of kind of quasi, I guess, kind of messianic religious group that was influenced by kind of Pan-Africanist ideals, and who was imprisoned by the Belgians for over 30 years. I think they actually, he kind of beat Nelson Mandela there in terms of his his prison stint. He died in prison in 1951. So let's, I guess, fast forward to independence, right? Congo gets its independence on the 30th of June, 1960. Patrice Lumumba gets elected as prime minister, who's leading a kind of coalition of different nationalist parties, some largely kind of influenced by other similar movements of like, Nkrumah and the like in Ghana. And Joseph Kasavubu becomes president, which is kind of a ceremonial role, although he will play a bigger role on things later on. And almost immediately, actually not almost immediately, Lumumba was faced with a major crisis because him and his African nationalist ideas were just a little bit too much for the old Belgians. Yeah. They were upset that the independence movement didn't really follow
the rules.
It didn't go exactly how they wanted. It didn't go. Yeah, no, I mean, they had like, too much of a democratic process, I guess, to let these parties get elected.
Too much independent.
Yeah. And, the quote unquote moderate forces didn't win. That is, the colonial, people that just go along with colonial rule. Again. And I mean, this is something that like, we'll talk about a little bit later with some of the slogans that came up with this. So it's just like after independence equals before independence. That's what the Belgians wanted. And they make that very clear, moving quickly forward. But even Lumumba's like kind of radicalism wasn't particularly radical by most standards. And even by the standards of like some other African liberation movements later on, like basically they favored some kind of mass national politics, economic development, Pan-Africanism, and we're internationally kind of leaning towards non-alignment, right? Because this is that time non-aligned movement gets found.
I guess that was one of the crucial things.
I think that's what upset them. And it's one of the things that upset them greatly. Yeah. The other is that like, okay, all of this is too commie for them in general, but then, okay, they had this colony and they valued this colony for its vast mineral wealth, right? And it's kind of too valuable to just leave into the hands of people that could go in a dangerous direction to them. And specifically, okay, we talked about rubber, we talked about, copper, all this other stuff. Uranium was a very big deal. The uranium that was mined for the American atomic bombs, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, came from mines in Eastern Congo. And obviously, this is 1960.
Yeah.
And the Americans they don't want, such valuable uranium deposits potentially falling into the hands of the Russians or.
Yeah.
God forbid the Congolese have their own nuclear program or something.
Sure.
That's not going to happen. So within a month of Lumumba coming to power, you have the so-called Congo crisis of 1960 to 65. So, the Belgians were the first to be dissatisfied, this with Lumumba, and this naturally aligned with U.S. and corporate interests, leading them to first incite a revolt in the military, which was still, this is again, this is a month after independence, less than a month after independence, weeks. It's still the infrastructure of the colonial army, the force publique, which hadn't yet been switched over to kind of a national army. And this rebellion was led by colonial officers who were still in place in the military there under the slogan, before independence equals after independence.
Okay.
That's very clear. It can't be more clear than that. But if that wasn't enough, and it wasn't, because Lumumba was actually pretty successful in talking down the mutiny. He's a pretty popular guy.
Yeah.
Didn't really go how they expected. So they got to work immediately fomenting a separatist movement in the eastern Katanga province, which is, again, where a lot of those strategic minerals happen to be, including the uranium and the like. It was also home to the largest white settler population in the country, which was, actually not too high compared to a lot of the other kind of surrounding colonies, like, the British in Kenya had a lot larger white settler population. Nevertheless, this was very important to the Belgians and to the Europeans, right, to make sure that the white population is safe.
How many people is it, do you know?
I think in Katanga, maybe, I think it was up to like 30, 40,000. It wasn't that small, but it wasn't huge either, right? And there are other pockets of like European settler groups in different parts of the Congo, but like the kind of largest is there. And so for this task, they had their own little Quisling leader, Moise Chombe, who would, come to be hailed in all these anti-communist circles as a hero. And on the 11th of July, so less than a month after independence, Katanga announces its secession. And again, I'm just going to read a small passage from the book. And this is about kind of the white settlement of this area. With this scheme, colonial settlers hoped to salvage their power and privileges through co-optation of a handful of reactionary black leaders. In the Katanga case, real power remained in the hands of former colonial officials who received the full backing of the Belgian state, who were assisted in their rape of the Congo and its resources by a host of white adventurers and mercenaries from all over Europe and southern Africa. Britain, France, and apartheid South Africa gave active support to the secession as their ruling classes shared the Belgians' fear of Lumumba's commitment to genuine independence and radical social change. In a region where colonial rule was being challenged head-on in all 10 countries south of the Congo and Tanzania, the white reactionary forces were determined to keep this mineral-rich province within the white-dominated southern Africa from Katanga to the Cape, and including the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland, the Portuguese colonies of Angola and Mozambique, and the High British Commission territories of Botswana, Lesotho, and Swaziland. Needless to say, Namibia had just become a fifth province of South Africa. The coming together of the white races to defend this political project with the help of their allies in Western Europe and North America, including former colonial officials, fascist groups, and U.S. conservatives led by Senators Barry Goldwater, Thomas Dodd, and their colleagues from Dixie, marked the high point of the counter-revolution in Central and Southern Africa. Despite their profession of faith against racism, the power elites of Britain, France, and Belgium were an integral part to this counter-revolution.
Okay.
Again, a very succinct way of kind of summarizing this.
So now I know what are we here to talk about? Is the adventurers, right?
The adventures. Now, we'll get there. We'll get there. So I am going to kind of quickly gloss over some details of the Congo crisis and try to summarize some of the major events. Just because, again, I don't want to assume that everybody knows something about the Congo crisis and what happened to Lumumba and the like. So yeah, the Belgians intervene militarily under the pretense of protecting the white population. And again, this is a quick summary because there's a lot of shit that happens here. Lumumba kind of naively calls for assistance from the UN, who authorized a peacekeeping operation, but refused to help the government retake the rebel provinces. It's kind of a classic example of the early UN kind of still being largely dominated by U.S. interests.
Mm-hmm.
And this is very clear in how they approach the Congo. They refuse, right, to help. They send peacekeeping force. It doesn't do anything. Surprise, surprise. Congo. And Lumumba had gone to the U.S. and the like to kind of ask them for their help too. Nobody wants to help him. So he asked for the Soviets for assistance, which they, send some advisors over there. And they're able to crush another separatist movement in South Kasai. Mobutu, who is at this time just an officer in the military, launches a coup on behalf of the CIA. Basically, Mobutu was a CIA man. We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
Lumumba is arrested. He manages to escape. Again, because he's a pretty popular figure, it's kind of hard to keep him imprisoned.
Mm-hmm.
So he escapes, kind of makes his way across Congo to, I think, to Kisangani, where he is arrested again, tortured, killed in January of 1961 at the age of 35. So he comes to power in June of 1960, and by January of 1961, he's dead. Belgian officers oversaw the entire operation and murder. Belgian gendarme is the one who later exhumed his body, dismembered it, and dissolved it in acid.
Yeah, it's a wonderful institution, the Belgian gendarmerie.
Yes.
It is glorious history.
Yeah. The killing of Lumumba was a big deal in the world at the time. There were protests all over the world. I mean, there was in Belgrade, they smashed the demonstrators, broke into the Belgian embassy and trashed it.
Yeah.
There were big protests in India, in the US even. And yeah, it was a big deal.
Arrest, ill treatment, imprisonment, death. Such was the fate of Patrice Lumumba. And it has been the signal for violent reactions in many parts of the world. First in the United Nations itself, where a Security Council meeting was violently interrupted. Fights continued in the lobbies and corridors. A series of struggles went on. And in the course of this would-be demonstration against the handling of the Congo situation, 18 United Nations guards were injured in making arrests. Now to reaction in Yugoslavia. This was the scene in Belgrade, where a crowd estimated at 150,000 people marched through the streets. A demonstration of disgust and anger. In Paris, the Federation of African Students demonstrated near the Belgian embassy. They said it was to show their concern over events in Africa and to express their mourning at the death of Lumumba. It wasn't long, however, before they were involved in clashes with the police, who aimed at keeping them on the move away from the embassy. A few of the demonstrators, disinclined to obey, were arrested. Finally, reaction in Cairo. Carrying Lumumba's picture, a large crowd marched to the Belgian embassy. Demonstrators climbed the railings and began their anti-Belgian protest by kicking down the embassy shield.
But the killing of Lumumba and the events that followed were as much or very much a result of the CIA and the Americans as much as it was the Belgians. Eisenhower openly didn't like Lumumba. Allen Dulles took it upon himself to hatch all kinds of strange, as they really liked these strange assassination plots at the time, like, the whole Fidel exploding cigars thing. I think for Lumumba, they wanted to do something with like cobra venom in toothpaste.
Geniuses.
It was all kinds of weird, like, hair-brained schemes, but the Belgians were kind of quick to the draw there. Although, again, all of this is done with the help of the CIA. This is something that, like, the CIA contests now, but it's pretty clear. They had a very particularly dubious CIA station chief named Lawrence Devlin, who was the kind of guy who did all the on-the-ground coordination, including turning Mobutu into an asset in the first place, which they did before Congo even got independence. So, like 1958. Yeah, so they bear a lot of responsibility of what was to come, and that was a lot. There's a lot more. So continuing our speed run through this Congolese history, UN General Secretary Dag Hammarskjöld dies in a plane crash.
Yeah.
Just north of Congo, right? That to this day is considered potentially.
A lot of people think that he was killed by the Americans. Yeah.
Right.
There's a documentary about that.
Right.
Yeah.
Although, the following General Secretary Uthant took a kind of more proactive measure against the Katanga secessionists, and the UN eventually helps the Congolese government reestablish control there. Moise Tshombe takes off with basically the entire treasury of Katanga and gets asylum in the place where most people get asylum at this time if you're a sketchy kind of fasci-oriented guy on the run, and that's in Franco, Spain. And since, we've talked a lot about WACL, the World Anti-Communist League, the Anti-Bolshevik Bloc of Nations, I want to read a little bit because I'd seen before in their bulletins that they loved the Katanga secessionist movement. They thought this was like a bastion of anti-communism, and they liked Tshombe himself. So I'm just going to...
Was Tshombe a member?
Congo did send delegates, yeah.
Okay.
But this was slightly later. So let me just pull up real quick. And this is like Yaroslav and Slava Stetsko writing about how great Katanga is. Katanga and the right of self-determination. So this is an article which they say, okay, a small heroic people striving to attain its independence, it has gone over to the side of the West, to the side of the white man, and for the first time on the African continent is endeavoring to set up a common front of the white man and the Negroes against the Russian menace.
Okay.
And what answer does it receive from the West? This is, when they're kind of criticizing the UN for taking a more proactive role. Basically, Katanga's great. Goes on and on and on. They're the ones. Ukraine should look to the Katanga struggle for.
Yeah.
So again, this is, you get the CIA involved, and all of a sudden, the Anti-Bolshevik Bloc of Nations is writing great things about you,
of course,
and how you're an inspiration. Who, yeah, of course, they say that the Katanga and Tshombe are working for racial harmony, that they're against prejudice, this kind of thing,
against all of these black races.
Yeah, exactly. The UN is morally bankrupt because it's clear that they're bending to the will of all the commie nations. When in the beginning, when Lumumba asked for help, the only people who were trying to get the UN to actually help him were like the non-aligned nations.
Sure.
So by 1963, obvious discontent with the state of things post-independence predictably led to mass rebellions led by Lumumbaist factions. This is also known commonly as the Second Independence Movement, because, the first independence movement was pretty quickly, squashed, right? And so you have the Kwila Rebellion in the kind of southwest, and the Simba Rebellion, which they often say is Maoist inspired.
Okay.
In the kind of east, they managed to seize a large portion of central and eastern Congo, most of it actually.
Was there any actual connection with China or?
Eventually, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was kind of a Maoist character to it. It was also this kind of peasant rebellion, kind of politically, although kind of politically it is kind of all over the place. But yeah, China did help kind of in the later portion of this. Yeah, but this is it's such typical behavior for like these Western countries, is that they're afraid of this, they're afraid of the country going communist. So they call us all kind of chaos.
Yes.
And then Lumumba does go to the Soviets, and then, they kill him.
Yeah.
And then there's like a communist rebellion in the country. This is, it's kind of the story of a lot of these Cold War anti-colonial movements in which, you have And it's like in Vietnam too, like, Ho Chi Minh, they had like the preamble to their constitution is kind of based off the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, we want to get along. And U.S. is like, nah.
Well, Cuba as well, no?
Yeah, Cuba as well, right? Yeah, exactly. Same story. And I mean, speaking of the Cubans, right? So now that we're in the Simba rebellion, we can start talking about how the CIA and the Belgian neocolonialists utilize Nazis and white racists to do their dirty work. Because as some of you may know, if you've like read Che Guevara stuff, he did spend some time in Congo, right?
Yeah.
And to assist the Simba forces and the Simba rebellion. And he goes there with a few hundred volunteers from Cuba, and doesn't have a great time. He didn't really have great things to say about some of the leadership in the Simba rebellion. But the Americans then decide, well, if they got their own Cubans, we'll get our own Cubans.
Yeah, of course.
So, they send Cuban advisors and mercenaries of their own, who a lot of them are kind of pilots and the like, who provide crucial air support with U.S. supplied aircraft to the white mercenaries that we're going to talk about in a minute. It is interesting, though, when we're at the Simba rebellion, to note that one of the leaders of the Simbas was Laurent Désiré Kabila, who was, who would come to overthrow Mobutu in the 90s when he fights the Serbian mercenaries and defeats them to overthrow Mobutu. Although at this point, he's in 1997, he's very much not, a communist.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, it's kind of interesting, right?
And Mobutu had a Milosevic connection, right?
Yeah.
In the 90s.
Yeah, we'll get into that in the next episode.
Yeah.
So you have this situation, right? The Americans have gotten deeply involved. There's Cubans involved, the Soviets and kind of neighboring independent African countries are sending support to these rebels. But you have kind of an impossible situation, right? Because they're trying to prop up a Congolese government which doesn't have much legitimacy to begin with, and which gets even less legitimacy when they help bring back Moise Tshombe out of exile to make him prime minister again. So this is a guy who, was totally disgraced. He had to run packing out of Katanga. They basically install him again to be prime minister. Of course, the army's in disarray. They don't have any particular reason to fight for this government, for this person.
Who was a separatist. Huh?
Yeah, who was a separatist.
Yeah.
They bring him back and put him in charge of the government in Kinshasa. So, of course, how do you prop a regime like that up? I mean, it helps a lot to have mercenaries who are kind of disconnected from the whole thing.
Sure.
Right. And who are willing to kind of do, dirty work.
Of course,
to get the job done. And it helps a lot when you have, backing of the CIA, air support, logistical support, all that kind of thing. You can kind of get a lot done. So now we're finally at the mercenaries, right?
Yeah.
And, who are these people? What is it? So
adventurers, right?
Adventurers. So the 5 Commando unit was formed as a counterinsurgency force, which was utilizing the kind of previously existing structure of the mercenary force that was in Katanga, which was called the 4 Commando, and which was led, both of them were led by this utterly detestable figure, this British major of Irish descent named Mad Mike Hoare. Now, I did not know that the name Hoare, which I've of course seen a million times, I always assumed that it was pronounced differently than Hoare, but it's not. I was very surprised.
It's not Hoare or something.
It's not Hoare, it's Hoare. So you learn something new every day. And, Mad Mike is this really irritating figure who is, for some reason, really beloved. But the Western media really loved him as this kind of no-nonsense adventurer type. And he died only pretty recently in South Africa in 2020. He was 100 years old. These people always live forever. We always say this on the show. I mean, look, Lumumba was 35.
Yeah.
This idiot lives to be 100 in South Africa, killed tons of people, just a horrible guy.
Yeah.
And he gets a curiously like neutral eulogy in the BBC.
Well, famous for objectivity, no?
Famous for objectivity, right? And I think can I go a little bit off on the whole British mad lad thing?
Sure,
we were talking about this a little bit before the show, but it irritates me like to no end that there's that kind of, you see it a lot now on the internet, but I mean, I think it's like a facet of British culture is like this obsession with the mad lads, the crazy guys that do, go to all the craziest places and drink and fight and do all this stuff. I mean, you see this now even like with British volunteers in Ukraine, like they're always like eulogized as like, he's a real mad lad who went out there. Like, Sal, you mentioned the idiot that was in Afghanistan, the kind of right wing, what was his name? And, I remember that because he was like trying to get evacuated or whatever. And everybody on the internet was like, oh, that's a real mad lad. Oh, he's fucking crazy. And I just hate this. Like, because this is kind of the whole way these guys are portrayed. I mean, they made a fucking action movie about them. And like, this is not something that, died out with like most of the British Empire. Like it lives on to this day. And they just love these people. And Mad Mike is like a terrible guy. He's a guy he's born in British India in 1919, served in the British Army in World War II in Asia, I think in Burma, reaching the rank of major. Now, a lot of the biographies then say like, oh, he went back to England and he wasn't suited for civilian life, so he had to keep living a life of adventure, which like, yeah, okay. But he went and participated like, okay, first of all, you don't just like happen to stumble upon becoming like a commander of a mercenary unit in the Congo that's working for Western intelligence to support a neo-colonial enterprise and regime. That doesn't just like happen to you because you're a crazy adventure guy who just happens to have, the rank of major and I'm going out there. And
he's just not suited for civilian life.
He's not suited for civilian
life. Too boring.
Life. They fail to mention that like what happened after World War II is like, yeah, okay, he got married, had kids. Oh, this is boring. So he participated in like the horrible, brutal British anti-communist counterinsurgency campaign in Malaysia, which is like where the British pioneered the use of Agent Orange and like chemical defoliants.
Adventure.
Torture, entire open air prisons of detainees and like the British there were doing horrible things. And so Mad Mike is out there in Malaysia, like having adventure. Like, I mean, it's madness. And so, okay, yeah, he does that. He's in Malaysia. He comes back. He's a mad lad. And then, where does he go after that? Well, like the dumping grounds for all terrible things, for a lot of terrible things in the Cold War, which is apartheid South Africa, which is where he decides to make his home and the like. I want to read just real quickly a segment from a biography of a fellow that we're going to talk about very soon, but describing Mad Lad Mike. Still in Durban, this yacht club president has become a notable member of the South African Industrial Society, and yet this ease, this wealth that many men consider to be an ending point in their lives, Hor plays it up on the floor of an African adventure. From Congo, the tumultuous echoes of the great Katangese fever reached him. So Hor, who studied the game of communist subversion in Malaysia, instinctively understands that this war in Katanga is a trap that, lured by the geopolitical pull of copper, the world of finance has fallen into. It is here in the Congo that the fate of Africa, of white and black Africans, will be played out, since the world is foolish enough to launch its own mercenaries against the only African who has built a modern providence. He, Major Hor, Mad Mike, will form an African legion of new mercenaries who will add to the thrills of a useful adventure with the certainty of being the pioneers of an African order, without which there would be no more Africa.
Wow.
This is okay. This was written by a Nazi.
Okay.
To be fair, but this is not far off from just how everybody talked about this.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like I said, it grows out of this 4-commando unit, and it's portrayed as this ragtag wild bunch of mad lads out there for adventure. But in reality, it's this more or less ideologically motivated volunteer force comprised of mostly South African and Rhodesians. Like I said at the top of the episode, along with, some couple Nazi Germans and a fascist Italian or two, Frenchmen. And like, were they in it for the money? Like, yeah, sure, absolutely. What, of course, yeah. But it's also not hard to see why a bunch of white South Africans and Rhodesians would have a vested interest in maintaining white dominance in Africa. I mean, this is obvious. And even like a lot of the other non-Rhodesian and white South Africans that took part in this were guys who moved to South Africa, like Mad Mike, he's in the Durban Yacht Club and, he's living in South Africa. Like, this Nazi guy we're going to talk about in a minute. They were all living in South Africa. So of course, if they can make a buck, sure. And, they did a lot of looting, a lot of pillaging, and a lot of mad lad killing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this is much more of an ideologically motivated force than, for example, the guys, those Yugo guys that got Mobutu overthrown, basically.
Yeah,
Those guys didn't give a fuck about being there at all. They got paid and just got wasted. So let's Sal, can you play me the clip of the South African recruits? Okay.
Did you join President Chombi's army?
Well, I come from Johannesburg, South Africa, and I think the reason why I joined this outfit is I think it's about high time that communism was stopped in the Congo.
I come from Vereniging South Africa. I joined the army for 3 reasons. Firstly, for the money. Secondly, to fight communism. And thirdly, for the adventure.
I joined the Congolese army because I am in favor of Mr. Chombi, and then to get away from the wife and my mother-in-law.
That's that ragtag spirit.
Yeah.
So the only one that's like, to get away from me, wife and me mother-in-law. And the rest of them was like, oh yeah, to fight communism from South Africa or whatever. So if you might have noticed, I kind of hate Mad Mike.
Sure, yeah.
So much that I don't particularly want to talk about him too much. But there were some other kind of big names that were involved with the 5 Commando, such as the very famous French mercenary who led several coups in African countries, Bob Denard. Do you know about him? I mean, we won't go into him too much, but he was also a guy that was kind of one of these mad lad, but French dudes who, I think he was twice basically the de facto leader of the Comoros. He overthrew the government there twice. And Mad Mike, for his part, tried to be Denard later. He was jailed in the Seychelles for getting caught trying to launch a coup with some other mercenaries. I think they were arrested in the airport and they had luggage with like false bottoms with AKs in them and stuff.
Okay.
They were sent there to launch a coup, and then he went to prison. But that's way later. So those are kind of like, the big names. And their mission that they chose to accept was obviously to go fight the Simba rebellion. And Western media, again, kind of obviously prioritized the whites in this.
Yeah.
This is from a I think some sort of British news from like 1964.
I'm standing on the edge of the Lualaba River at Kindu in the middle of the Congo. Kindu has become the main staging point for the attack on Stanleyville, the rebel stronghold, the rebel capital of the Congo. And these trucks and men and equipment you see going on the ferry are moving up already across the river for the attack on Stanleyville. Stanleyville is not only the rebel capital of the Congo, it is also the setting for what could be one of the most tragic stories of the Congo. In Stanleyville, there are 1,000 whites, men, women, and children, who are being held as hostages by the rebels.
Oh my God.
Among them are 25 British, 60 Americans, and more than 500 Belgians. And as the attack goes in, some of those people could be killed. And that's what's worrying everyone here.
Yeah.
These mercenaries resting up here in Kindu form the spearhead of the Congolese forces. by common consent, they're the people who do most of the real fighting.
Okay. So, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
What could be the greatest tragedy of this war that has claimed so many lives? The potential massacre of these white people that are in Stanleyville. I mean, yeah. So obviously, and this is a pretty favorable portrayal here. I mean, they call them mercenaries, but they're saying they're the only ones who are doing the real fighting here.
Yeah.
And that they're going in to avert this genocide of white people.
Yeah.
And they did use the term genocide a lot to basically give this humanitarian pretenses also in the Katanga too, they were saying that. So, I mean, this is a pretty standard stuff. But like, as we know, the reality of this fighting force is that they're basically a death squad.
Of course, yeah.
Armed to the teeth with American weapons, with American air support, against an enemy who is, though numerically superior, lacking in pretty much every other respect. So, I mean, the Simba rebels don't have a fucking air force. They don't even really have anti-aircraft weapons. There is support coming from outside, but very little. And compared to, what the CIA is given these guys, virtually nothing. Right. So let's hear the mad lad himself. And just for context, this interview is done while he's on his yacht, I guess, in South Africa. He's steering a boat, so there are like sea sounds.
Okay.
While he's talking.
The greatest thrill I get, of course, is the command of men. I'm talking about real men.
Real men.
Not a whole flock of Nancy boys. I mean the real McCoy. And I love being in the presence of hard men. Not necessarily ruffians, but men who can live hard and not grumble. I like that type. The fact that they are under my command and that I have, in fact, the power of life or death over them, this moves me in a strange way and makes all the sacrifices worthwhile.
Were the stories of looting by the mercenaries in the Congo exaggerated?
Well, I wasn't in a position to read most of the stories about the looting, but looting there was. There's no question about it.
How about atrocities?
No, extremely few. In fact, never an atrocity in my command knowingly perpetrated. Never an order given to that end.
Well, were there any summary executions? Mercy killings of wounded Simba?
There's quite a lot of that, and summary court-martials and executions. I don't regard that as anything but normal practice in action. After all, you can't go around, particularly with a fast-moving column, you can't go along with a big echelon of 500 prisoners. You've got to very quickly decide who are the ones that have got to be tried and punished.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, he's pretty open about it. Yes, they're looting. Oh, no, atrocities, never. Very little hours.
Extremely few.
Extremely few. But yeah, you can't move with 500 prisoners.
Yeah.
I'm very sure that's like the definition of a war crime. You can't just shoot. You can't just shoot your prisoners. I mean, I guess he said he tried them. Somebody called marshals.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, this is the caliber of mad lad, really great guy that we're talking about. And let's get another little clip of a nice Rhodesian mad lad.
You say you wanted to make them suffer. How did you make them suffer?
Well, in the company we were in, we took no prisoners. If we did take one, I had the pleasure of handling him. It was my pleasure.
What sort of things did you do?
I used to make him torture, stick a hot bayonet through him. In other words, stick a hot bayonet on hot coals and cover it with mud and make the mud cake around it. And just crack the mud off and stick a red hot bayonet into a human body and make him walk with that.
Did you feel differently because you were doing this to black men? Could you have done it as easily to a white man?
No, I don't think so.
Why?
Well, I just never had the experience of killing a white man. A black man's like an animal to me.
And there you have it.
Pretty clear, yeah.
Pretty clear. It can't be more clear than both of them. So that the first one, that's the actual commander.
Yeah.
A guy who got a nice eulogy on
yeah.
as being like, oh, well, he was a strange guy. Controversial guy. They take no prisoners.
That eulogy was less than 10 years ago, right?
It was in 2020.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's be real here. So, I mean, okay, and I know there's we've been asked to do something about Rhodesiaphilia in the Nazi scene, and really everything you see about them is the fucking worst. Jesus Christ. No. So whore and psychotic Rhodesians and South Africans aside, I would like to talk about another mad lad, a German fellow by the name of Siegfried Friedrich Heinrich Müller.
Yeah, so actual Nazis are involved.
Actual Nazis are involved. This guy has basically every stereotypical German name back to back.
So what is the full name?
Siegfried Friedrich Heinrich Müller.
Okay.
It's a fake ass name. And I want to focus mainly on him compared to some of these other guys because he really embodies perfectly the whole Nazi to NATO freedom fighter pipeline that we talked about so much on the show for this kind of Cold War period. And of course, I did get a hold of his memoirs, which are a really bizarre read. And I would like to share some of that insanity with you.
What is his nickname? Kongo?
Kongo Müller.
Kongo Müller, yeah. I heard some time ago about him. People shared on social media like an old documentary from the DDR that some East German journalists did pretending to be from West Germany and interviewed him where he quite openly spoke about being a fucking Nazi.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he's much better, much more well known in Germany than he is outside of it. Unless you're one of those, weirdos that's really into the Congo War from one, there are the Rhodesian fetishist people who are into every kind of white mercenary thing in Africa. Because again, Mad Mike made it seem cool. They're not a bunch of Nancy boys or whatever. They're tough, hard men.
Yes.
I think, and Herr Müller is kind of like this, but more sentimental and Prussian in his approach. Okay, no. Play it now. I just want All right. Soundy's back, baby. So, old Siegfried Mueller was born in 1920. So he was born in 1920 in what is now Poland to a proud Prussian military family. His dad was, an officer, all of his family officers forever, Prussian military discipline. His dad was in World War I and whatever. And as a young lad, he participated in German military operations from the very start. So, he was marching into Poland. That was kind of boring to him because they didn't really see much action and whatever. But the Eastern Front was kind of a different story for him. He got wounded in the Soviet Union, and for that was awarded an Iron Cross, which of course he would famously continue to wear proudly in the Congo. And at the end of the war, he was lucky enough to find himself in the American zone of control, where he would eventually end up attending what he says, quote unquote, the American Military School in 1950. It was there that he learned to embrace the cause of his former nemesis.
American Military School, is that the CIA?
It's a good question because they, in other biographies of his, they said that he was in the civilian American whatever corps, the guys that were the auxiliaries, civilian auxiliaries.
Okay.
But he seems to kind of say different. He kind of implies that it wasn't that.
Okay.
And he says it's the American Military School. And by the way, this is a guy who calls World War II the White Civil War.
Of course. Yeah.
Just in case you forget. We're talking about a Nazi here. And I'm going to read again from his memoirs. I'm going to do this a lot because it is kind of ridiculous in so many ways. He calls it both the European Civil War and the White Civil War. Mm-hmm. The Korean engagement, which had just broken out, already showed that the European Civil War was outdated, that the enemy of civilization was going to encircle the free world through Asia and Africa, using all psychological and revolutionary means to turn peace into what would soon be called the Cold War. The American forces, if they manage to master their victory over Germany, can be the embryo of the army of peace, for which I am continually thinking on, and which, by its deterrent force, both military and psychological, can prevent the worst. It is in this spirit that I entered the American military school in 1950. 5 months of lessons brought me face to face with an engaging world, which led me to what I considered to be a decisive commitment of my life as a man, as a German, my entry into NATO. 6 years of useful service at last as a lieutenant in the tactical air forces in the brotherhood of arms of all free nations was the richest experience of my life as a soldier, a NATO mercenary. I tried to solve the problems posed by this choice first with Prussian zeal, and then it goes on. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, here he is. He's embraced the cause. He knows that the future is going to be brought about by the American world order, its former enemies. And I need just one more quote here too. And this is on the meaning of what it means to be a mercenary in Africa. Okay. For my European comrades, this was the meaning of our African struggle in the Congo. That is to maintain order. Revolutionary war, above all, is a peacekeeping commitment to protect the populations. It calls for the bringing together of all specialists in subversive warfare in a school of higher training in the service of the free world. It is ultimately as important as atomic defense, since these conquests in the East were made by specialists of the Chinese and Russian revolutionary institutes. Blah, blah, blah. They're keeping everything in check in the mountains. This pioneering work must become the concern of those who want to make NATO a real defense tool for the free world. So you, my white African comrade Nell, and you, my black African brother Mutamba, you have not died in vain. Men like Skorzeny for Germany and Sterling for the British Eighth Army demonstrated the importance of commando groups in modern warfare. The mercenaries intervene as a force of order.
It's interesting that he called the white guy comrade and the black guy brother. Yeah, I would expect from a Nazi to at least reverse that. But yeah.
Well,
yeah.
He's gotten soft and
yeah.
It's still a white civil war, but comrade, brother. I don't know. Maybe comrade's a higher respect.
It's obviously, I mean, for him. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, after his service in NATO, and unable to work, I guess, in the German army in the Bundeswehr, he moved on to work in Africa. First doing stuff for oil companies in Libya, I think for BP, before making his way in 1962 to, again, the haven of all things shitty in the Cold War, South Africa.
Sure.
Where he moved. And he was very confused as to why people found apartheid distasteful.
Oh, yeah?
And this is a very German approach to this. Apartheid is not an extermination solution, but an attempt to find an intelligent, reasonable solution to the essential problems of the coexistence of races.
Sure, yeah. Like, they're not doing the Holocaust there.
They're not doing the Holocaust. It's a rational solution to this problem. The Boer government, they want everybody to develop together, but separately.
Yeah.
It's a logical, everything is to him about order. The mercenary maintains order. This is a logical system. These people are just crying about nothing.
Yes.
It's wonderful. Impossible.
He's confused.
So before long, of course, he finds himself enlisting in Mad Mike's mercenary force. I'm guessing this is because their recruitment centers were predominantly in South Africa and in Rhodesia. So yeah, I mean, a guy like him who is proud to serve and wanted to continue to serve in the defense of order.
I guess he missed out on being in the first like pan-European army, which was the Waffen-SS, because he was in the Wehrmacht. So maybe he wanted that all the time, and then he was proud to get a second chance to be a part of NATO, I guess.
Yeah, that's possible.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's really exactly what we talked about. And it's a guy, Iron Cross, proudly displaying it, like no qualms about it. It's just, I'm ready to fight for the new order.
Sure. The new order.
The new order. And okay, since he was, of course, a decorated officer, certain kind of decoration, with combat experience, naturally he was given a command position in Mad Mike's forces. Because, if you look at it, like a lot of the guys, they did have some officers. So Mad Mike was a major. They had some guys who were in the, French Foreign Legion and the like, a few Rhodesian special forces dudes, and then just, like a lot of, grunts, who were not particularly, well trained or had, prior military experience. So, Siegfried's a good guy to have on your side. Once again, I need to read from it.
Okay.
It was too funny. I didn't even intend on using it so much. I mean, I did want to use it. But as I was reading through it, I was just like, this is so ridiculous. And I've seen that documentary that you mentioned. And of course it's all in German. So like it's not great for clips. But there is something particularly ridiculous about this guy out there running around in Congo with an Iron Cross on, just doing what he does. I mean, he even says that he met an Israeli officer.
Oh,
the Israelis were also working with Mobutu later and the like. And he said he walked, with his Iron Cross proudly, and then they had like a beer together or something.
Okay.
So okay, this is where you cue the music. Okay, no, wait, sorry. So let's just give this context. This is a part of the book where he's commenting on his journey from like the frozen steppes of the Eastern Front to the sweltering jungles of Congo. And he says, but it's been 20 years since then. It's 45 degrees in the shade, and I'm below the equator, bathing in sticky sweat of red dust. My Iron Cross is still here, the partisans too, but my Fuhrer is no longer here to see this extraordinary spectacle. He goes on to say something like, where we racists are defending a colored people against the little yellow men of the Red Revolution, meaning the Chinese.
Yeah.
And they kind of got real racist there at the end. It's like, if only the Fuhrer could see me now in Congo, what would he? What a spectacle this is.
He kind of acknowledges that it's all ridiculous, no? I mean, that end when he says, when we racists defend.
But they he said it's maintaining order is of primary importance, that you have to keep the order that was established in line.
Yeah, sure. The Fuhrer would be so proud.
Yes. I mean, maybe. He seemed to think possible.
Yeah, sure.
And I mean, his account of for the most part of the Congo War is quite boring. Like a lot of it's these kind of tall tales of their heroism in battle, which of course we know is not particularly true against, these horrible partisans, and like, they're all around, and it's just like being in, whatever, in the Eastern Front. A lot of it is also this kind of his weird philosophies about the nature of being a mercenary, how that's like a necessary thing in society from the Roman Empire on. Like, all great forces utilize mercenaries. Mercenaries are important, like in conquest is important to like establishing order and all this kind of stuff. And then of course all this is like coupled with these like racist interjections about like the nature of Africans around him, which, I didn't play this, but at the end of the Mad Mike interview, he says something that's also much like what Müller says, which is like, the Africans here, they don't concern themselves with warfare because, they eat and then they drink and dance and they don't care about war. Like it's, because again, it's this like racist portrayal of the Congolese as Africans in general as like children, right?
Yeah.
Who like don't know the ways of civilization. Müller says the same thing, like, they don't have to work. They don't have a work ethic because everything grows naturally there. And, you can pick a banana off the tree and eat it and, pick food from the ground and everything is easy for them. Not like, us Germans who have to like, pickle and prepare for the winter or whatever. This kind of like ridiculous shit. So a lot of it is that. But what I did find more interesting is that he does give a kind of interesting glimpse into some of the other profiles of different mercenaries who were there with him. And of course, he's giving kind of glowing reviews of these guys. They're really great guys. So there's like Gerhard von Blotnitz, who is another German from East Prussia, although he was only a child in World War II, but his family fled the Soviet advance and eventually settled in South Africa, where they became landowners. And his motivation to fight was that he believed that the white man must be able to live in Africa, and that segregation and extremism must not be tolerated. And that, Chombe is black, very black indeed, but he is a realist politician, agreeable to anyone who leans toward the West, whatever his color of skin.
Okay. So segregation must not be tolerated.
Well, you can't have this, it's segregation when, I guess, when the Africans control their own country.
Okay. I guess that's segregation.
That's extremism.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
That's an extremist position. Lumumba was an extremist guy.
You're segregating
unreasonable
Europeans
desires
out of Africa is the segregation, I guess, or something like that.
Which, is not even something that Lumumba particularly advocated. Okay, there were massacres of some of the white settlers, but this is well into the Congo crisis, which you have white mercenaries fighting for the former colonial power and other neo-colonial powers. A very clear situation. Whatever. But yes, it's it's just like those South Africans before that. Like they're there to fight communism. They are endangered. They feel endangered by any kind of power that Africans might have over their own destinies in Africa. Clearly this is bad. And it takes a Gerhard von Blotnitz to come out there and adventure, and rob corpses for whatever kind of money they can find. Or a guy like Georg Kral, who is a half Czech, half German, who's in the Hitler Youth, and then fled communist Czechoslovakia to join the French Foreign Legion, where he did wonderful things like fight in Indochina, Algeria, before moving also to South Africa to live, and also said he was fighting for ideological reasons.
Okay.
So, you do have some kind of hardened cold warriors here. Indochina, Algeria, then Congo. He described another interesting Italian who was there, who he, I think, only calls by the name Mahe. He calls him the Italian mercenary, who was a mechanic in Milan in the distant past. When his work was done, he used to run to the young fascists meeting to exalt his hope in wresting Italy from the communists. And there, on that African track, his hands in the grease and oil, the lives of his comrades who are still fighting against the same enemy he had chosen for himself more than 30 years ago. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So, it turns out that all of the Mad Lad adventures are a bunch of either Nazi or super racist freaks.
Of course. Yeah.
Surprise.
But fighting for moderate political goals
political forces
against extremism and segregation.
Yes. Yes, they're fighting against racism.
Practically
so I could go back to apartheid South Africa and go to the yacht club.
Yeah.
Have very equal lives.
Yeah.
To a majority of the people who live there. So as far as the war itself went, Tshombe predictably didn't last too long. For the reasons I stated above. I mean, he was not a popular guy.
No.
However, and he was eventually replaced by Mobutu himself, finally. However, there was actually a mutiny among some Tshombe supporters, Tshombe loyalists, which was supported by some factions of the mercenaries.
Okay.
So, in other words, it's a complete clusterfuck. And Tshombe, once again, of course, goes off to Franco's Spain until his death in 1969, which he was again eulogized in the anti-Bolshevik Bloc of Nations. I think that they described him. Tshombe died and fought and died for the independence of Katanga. I mean, he didn't die for the independence of Katanga. He died in Spain. But he was devoted friend of Western civilization and stood for the self-determination of African nations and for cooperation between colored and white peoples.
Yeah.
Again, this is not extremist. He just wanted to cooperate, maintain the order of cooperation that existed since the scramble for Africa to 1960. And that was so rudely disrupted for, a year or less than a year by.
Well, everyone had their own role and it was all fine.
Clearly.
Yeah.
It's interesting that, Müller actually even says like that the mineral interests bring them there. Like that's of vital importance as well. Like they're not even lying about that. And then they're kind of also just kind of making this ideological facade around that too, as they know that that's what they want. I mean, it's like today too. I mean, all of our rare earth minerals coming from Congo, like everybody's willing to let whatever happen there. But yeah, the mercenaries in there were able to kind of halt decisive rebel advances in a few crucial engagements, mostly in 1964. In 65, obviously, it kind of all starts to fall apart. Again, using the considerable advantages that they had with air support. And the Simbas themselves faced a lot of logistical and command issues that sent them into disarray. And by the end of 1965, they were kind of effectively crushed. Although, I mean, there were pockets of resistance that continued. Again, I'm glossing over a whole lot of stuff here. There was a lot of stuff that happened there, and the Chinese involvement versus the kind of the Soviet involvement in other countries in the region, Tanzania or whatever. But we do know, of course, that Mobutu ends up going on to consolidate power and hold it until the 1990s. But having a whole bunch of white mercenaries fighting on the side of a supposedly independent African country was starting to be a little bit of a bad look.
Yeah.
It was starting to, as the state was again consolidating power and having crushed the insurgency, which again held like half the country for some time. It was kind of time to disband the unit. But they stuck around until 1967. And again, there's too much with Mobutu to even talk about here because like maybe we can save some of that for the next episode, just like before his ouster, because he kind of goes all over the place too. I mean, for what it's worth, the ideology that governed, that, he supposedly governed by, was a kind of quasi third positionist ideology.
Okay.
Insofar as it actually kind of existed beyond just Mobutu being Mobutu.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, like he would engage in these kind of attempts to gain like nationalist legitimacy by like doing Africanization campaigns, changing all the names of like colonial cities, like Stanleyville, Kisangani, Kinshasa, from Leopoldville, all this kind of stuff, which, okay, of course you're going to do that. You're not going to live in fucking Leopoldville as you're not going to have Leopoldville as your capital of an independent country of like, the guy who like literally decimated the population in his like 23 years of personal rule of the country. And then, Mobutu did like play his role for that part of the Cold War as well. I mean, he hosted the anti-communist forces of Angola in Congo, the Joseph Savimbi's forces, who we have talked about a little bit before because of Joseph Savimbi's connections to the American right as like being a kind of popular force there, and with like the evangelicals, the Coors family and the like.
Okay.
And Mobutu, for his part, was also actually like a good friend of important people in the U.S., including like Pat Robertson, I believe.
Oh.
A very close friend of the Bush family. I think he's the only...
But what was the kind of the third position? Is the part of the ideology? Did he say things against capitalism or like?
Yeah, it was against communism and capitalism.
But friends with the Bush family.
But friends with the Bush family.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean they were also did kind of have a policy of non-alignment too, which was kind of later. But I mean later he was also ended up being kind of pals with China. Too, you know, he goes to North Korea and China, has like kind of cordial relationship there with them, because also the Chinese were supporting Savimbi's forces against the Cuban supported MPLA and the like. There was that period in the 70s where they all had like kind of Mao suits in Congo, kind of stuff like that. So I mean, it's an interesting regime, to say the least. But yeah, I think I mean, yes, it could be maybe qualified as some sort of third positionist ideology, and I'm sure some of the stuff rubbed off on him. I mean, he, like I said, with the Bush family. Sorry, I started to talk about that. I think he's one of the only heads of state, period, to have vacationed in the Bush family home in Kennebunkport, Maine.
Wow.
Like Mobutu.
Yeah.
It's like eating lobster in Maine with like, you know, little George and George Sr. and Jeb probably running around. Oh, Uncle Mobutu's here. So yeah, that is kind of the short story of Mobutu's rise to power, which, you know, is in large part because of the CIA bringing in kind of racist and fascist death squads to do their bidding. And next episode, next episode we are going into the White Legion and his fall from power when the Bosnian Serbs did not do so well. They were not as successful as
Core and the boys.
As Hoare and Mueller. Hoare and Mueller's Mad Lad Adventure.
Did you say Whore and the Boars?
Boys. Whore and the Boars.
Yeah, the Bosnian Serbs had a different style of warfare.
I mean, I'm not even sure if it is a different style, but also like there was not the same backing, I think.
Sure. Yeah.
And they didn't care nearly as much.
No.
So there you have it. Any final thoughts?
Well, I mean, it's quite a story. Horrible people. In that sense, it's very typical of our podcast, but yeah, a very different setting for those types of people.
Yeah,
but they seem very kind of. This is like unlike most of Nazis that we cover. These are like Nazis and racists in a very good mood, like enjoying life. Seem almost living their dream.
Yeah, which I think is this kind of when these Nazis have these Rhodesia fantasies, it's that they will be like hard men who can go out there and just kill people.
Yeah.
Like it is this really kind of psychotic, like perverse desire to relive this kind of colonial moment in which they can be like absolute, you know, bosses of the land. When men were men kind of bullshit. Like I you know, when you watch some of these interviews with these people that participated, like the comments are full of like, now that's a real Rhodesian or whatever.
Yeah.
Like people that are, you know, now on YouTube saying this kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think we will have to do a Rhodesian series soon. I would very much like to do that. Maybe it can even be a longer one because I'm happy to do deep dives into that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess all of this was like, you know, especially for someone like Mueller going through, you know, the catastrophe for them of the Second World War, and then getting this second chance to do Nazi racist stuff, but this time seen as a good guy with the backing of the West, fighting for white civilization or Europe.
Right, because World War II was a European civil war, a white civil war, and finally, I mean, he likes Churchill a lot.
Well, for sure, yeah.
He calls him like a genius and the great Churchill and the like. And also, the great Churchill for some of his like more racist moments in his, colonial past, right? That's all a great thing. It's great that they were finally able to come together to, fight the real enemy.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, Mueller in that documentary done by like DDR journalists also seemed kind of very cheerful in a very good mood. And also there's this, when you mentioned that he said something about the minerals, there's this kind of honesty about him. He's just very open. I think that like they almost probably didn't even pretend to be like from East Germany, from West Germany. I think he would like gladly talk about his Nazi stuff to
anyone. Yeah.
To anyone. Yeah.
I mean, this isn't in his memoirs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like, a secret diary of his that came out later. No, he wanted this to be published.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, he's I'm out there with my Iron Cross. I had a beer with an Israeli officer,
Yeah. I mean, and the West, like, and the Americans especially, like, openly did like a kind of pro-Nazi propaganda after the Second World War by talking about a lot about how the Germans were good soldiers.
Yes.
Like, even though we don't, they were like maybe, Nazis and that's bad. But, they have this tradition of war and being good soldiers.
I mean, famously, when Reagan goes to the German war cemetery and, like, lays a wreath there as, a sign of respect.
And that was like a very good propaganda for, like, a mercenary, Like, that Iron Cross was also, I think, a part of that as well. Like, okay, this is, like, this is a good soldier.
Yeah.
Like, even the Americans think so.
And, of course, he dies in the 80s. In South Africa. So like, he went on to just live in a super racist place and where, just walk around with his Iron Cross and talk about the good old days and the Eastern Front and then Congo.
If only the Fuhrer was there to see the spectacle.
Yeah. I mean, this kind of stuff, like just Congolese history becomes so depressing from the minute that like Europeans set foot there to like now.
Yeah.
And like so much of what you see now can really be traced back to, that moment in 1960 when like, okay, everything aside, post-colonial states, this, that, and the other thing, there wasn't even a chance of anything else happening.
Sure.
Of anything happening.
Yeah.
Because they just immediately within a month were getting to work just carving that country up for its mineral resources.
Yeah. Horrible shit.
Yes, indeed. All right. Well,
okay.
Kwaheri yakunana. Bye.
Bye.
Yakobomba mabe mingi mbokesili ezongi ya biso takweseko kati baninga na pasi oyo tomoni ye kasi mpe bobosanaka te o elonge Lumumba Patrice banyokoli ye mpe alembi te o lelo ya pikidala boye yakobomba mabe mingi mbokesili ezongi ya biso takweseko kati baninga na pasi oyo tomoni ye kasi mpe bobosanaka te o elonge Lumumba Patrice banyokoli ye mpe alembi te o lelo ya pikidala boye MNC, parti majoritaire, vive la démocratie. Yakobomba mabe mingi mbokesili ezongi ya biso takweseko kaki baninga na pasi oyo tomoni kasi mpe bobosanaka te o elonge Lumumba Patrice banyokoli ye mpe alembi te ololo ya pikidala MNC ya Lumumba Patrice ebimisi Kongo na bongo bamonisi ye pasi alembi te lelo yo Mandela Nangai. Vive Lumumba Patrice, MSC à Lumumba.